So my name's James Frank, and I started as a graphic designer about 15 years ago, working in web design for a digital agency, doing things like e-commerce stores. Did the first e-commerce store in the UK, and websites for blue chip clients like Jaguar, Dell, computers, all of that kind of thing. And then about 6 years ago, I started a company called Pixico, who basically work with filmmakers specifically to build websites mostly and other digital assets, widgets, and other strategies. So worked around a little bit around crowdfunding, but mostly around sort of ways to promote various forms of either traditional or new forms of distribution. I also work at BritDoc. I'm the creative director at BritDoc. And this presentation is presented by Shooting People. Hello, come and join us if there's...
Yeah, there's a chair right here.
There's a chair
Okay,
here.
there's
Yeah.
one.
Oh, okay.
Great.
Oh, we can shuffle up.
Move over.
So since there weren't many people, we thought let's just
Around the table.
sit around the table, and then we can So feel free to interject at any point. So Shooting People is the world's largest film network, social network for filmmakers, based in the UK and the US, and this was going to be presented by myself and Ingrid Kopp from Shooting People, who runs Shooting People in the US. But unfortunately, due to visa complications, she can't be here, which is all very boring, so I'm afraid you're just stuck with me, which is also very boring. So I'm going to talk very briefly about the history of how, just for a few minutes, but how the web has changed the way we think about things. A lot of these kind of things you will recognise and know already from everyone having already used a lot of these tools. But I think it's worth kind of laying the groundwork for kind of why the web is a different way of thinking about things and how digital impacts on the process of film. In any of its forms. So the internet is very different to other forms of media in the past, in that first of all it was the internet allows things to be changed. They were also slightly different in that instead of being a one-way channel, let's skip through these. Instead of being a one-way channel like TV was, it's a many-to-many process of communication. So Facebook is a perfect example of that, in that there are many networks within Facebook as a site, and they, in a way, reflect and mirror the real networks that we have in real life, where we are friends with many people. So it's, in many ways, it's a slightly more natural way of thinking about things. But that has a massive impact on the way that we can use the web, because it now allows many people to publish things, and people do. So that's why we see a plethora of blogs and Twitter feeds and microblogging, and lots of user-generated content and all of this kind of thing that previously wouldn't have been possible. A lot of people talk a lot about the impact of the internet. Most of it, I think, is yet to be proved. I think this is a great quote. Ingrid found this quote. The 19th century culture was defined by the novel, 20th century culture was defined by cinema, the culture of the 21st century will be defined by the interface. When you start to think about the impact that the internet has had on the process of making a film and distributing a film, it's worth remembering all the time and going back to that cinema is a one-to-many process, but the internet is a many-to-many process, and it's more a reflection of the real-world networks we have as friends, or social networks, or professional networks and things like that.
Are you putting this on your website, the PowerPoint?
Yes. At the end, I'll just give you a web address. There's a wiki with all of this information on and loads more
to your
information.
session last November was fantastic. I thought I loved your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. So you would have had Ingrid speak last year as well, yeah?
Not last year, the year before.
Oh, okay, cool. So that means that from a filmmaker's point of view, we can't really talk anymore about audiences. It's no longer about a process of the one-way process. I make a film and everyone watches it. The internet has changed that. And so we'll go through how that's changed. But first, some light relief.
Come on, mate. Just tell me you hooked up with that chick the other night. I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did hook up with that chick. Please. There's a bear behind you. What? Bear behind you? Shit! I tell you, there's a fucking bear behind you. Do something about it. Come on. Just shoot it now. I can't. Just shoot it. I'm telling you. I can't. Come on. Shoot this bear! Come on! I can't! Just shoot it! Hey! I don't want to shoot this bear! Help me to rewrite this story. Type anything you want with your keyboard. Then enjoy.
Come in, pull up a chair. Yeah. Okay. I like that clip. Ingrid made that clip for this panel, and that was an advert from about a year and a half ago, something like that. But I think it really illustrates the idea that what started off as a linear narrative then completely changed, and you had a choice. Don't shoot the bear, shoot the bear, and then it turned into you had an awful lot of choices. Type any random thing in, and the chances are most people are going to type in, one or two things. There was the obvious one, and a few others, and there are lots of different videos that ended with. But I think it really illustrates well how things have changed because of the internet. So before we go through all these different types of things that you can do online, I wanted to talk very, very briefly about why this is interesting and why it's pertinent. And I think as traditional forms of distribution are becoming more and more difficult, and people talk about traditional forms of distribution collapsing and people moving away from TV, the numbers that you get online are quite unpredictable, but sometimes they're really, really good. So this was the number of visits to a documentary from a few years ago. I think the number of visits is really tiny. It was only over a couple of weeks, so it's not really the numbers that are interesting. But I think what's really interesting is the percentages of people coming from social network sites. So there's about just about 11% of people have discovered the film from Twitter and Facebook. That's 1 in 10 people have discovered the film from something that didn't exist a few years ago, and that's only going to grow. So I think the big question of why be interested in this is that ultimately these are new tools to get films seen, and that's only going to increase. So what follows is a kind of a bit of a list of interesting things that are happening on the web. So we'll go through these one by one. If there's anything that really interests you, please just stop me and we'll talk about it a little more. If everyone's heard about it, just we'll skip over it. This has been talked about a lot today. Crowdsourcing funds. This is a really good example. My reincarnation it raised $150,000. Fantastic figure. Not everyone's doing this. There are an awful lot of projects that are raising $3, $10, and so on. But where the project really suits it, this is definitely working. People are crowdsourcing footage. This has been going on for a little while. There was a film a while ago called Star Wreck, and the idea behind Star Wreck was that everyone contributed. Pull up a chair and everyone contributed a little bit of footage to the film. It was a 3D film, and they basically finished the film and then sold it, having not actually made anything of any footage from the film themselves. This is a great example of the protests that went on in Egypt that eventually, brought down the regime there. They took crowdsourced footage, so live feeds from people. Well, not live feeds, but footage from people's phones and so on. And I think this is something we'll see a lot more of. This is not related to film particularly, but it's a really nice idea. And this website came from the problems in Kenya a few years ago, where there were riots and so on. And what happened was they wanted a way of mapping all the problems, because the news agencies couldn't feed all of this information through to people, and people needed to know where there were problems and things like that. So what happens is that people either text in using their mobile phones, or other mechanisms, but mostly via mobile phones, and basically relay information to the website about what's going on the ground, and then that's presented in a map. They used it after the earthquake in Haiti, just to show where the problems were and what the situation was on the ground. So crowdsourcing crisis information, and there are other ways of crowdsourcing information as well. Crowdsourcing lots of different ideas. So this was a project from a few years ago that they got 10,000 people to draw a picture of a sheep, and then presented it really rather beautifully as an animation. And you can kind of imagine what 10,000 images of sheep looked like. I think this is a really interesting project, not because it's particularly amazing in that that's 10,000 pictures of sheep, but as a sort of a basis of an idea, there are so many things that you can do as a filmmaker in terms of crowdsourcing that kind of information.
Just a quick question with that: how did they launch it to get 10,000?
That's a really good question. I can't remember how they did it.
Contacted farmers, maybe? Or
yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are viral, and so people think it's a bit of fun and pass it on to their friends. And
so it's literally a matter of just starting the momentum through emails, starting with friends.
Yeah,
and things.
yeah. And for every one of these that everyone's heard of, there's probably a couple of thousand that no one's heard of, and to make something go viral is really, really, really difficult, and there's as much luck as it is hard work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I don't actually remember how they did that. If Ingrid was here, she could tell us, but I can't remember.
No worries.
This is crowdsourcing solutions. So people post problems that they have, and people suggest solutions. This one has a quite interesting scientific application. This leads quite nicely onto the idea. And this is quite an interesting topic over the last couple of years online, the idea of what to do with vast amounts of data. So the internet now, with its 1 billion, 2 billion, whatever it is, users, is producing vast amounts of data. And you just think about the amount of data coming through Facebook and Twitter, but there are other sources of this data. Data, when it's aggregated, becomes really, really very, very interesting, and so people are exploring all sorts of really creative ways, a bit like that website showing the hotspots in Kenya or hotspots in Haiti, creative ways of showing large amounts of data. As more and more things produce data, so people talk about data coming from all sorts of things. When you're driving your car is measuring things and where it is, and GPS is measuring it, and the engine temperature, all of this data. People are talking about other forms of data that perhaps we don't normally think about, so things like water flow through a city, or electricity grids, all this feedback. If there was a way of visualizing this so that it was useful to human beings, you could then start to make much more informed decisions. Imagine if you had a live map of where every ambulance was and how long the projected time was to get to certain places, although they have actually done that now. This would be really useful. So this is a big thing at the moment, and will continue to get much, much bigger. How do we deal with large amounts of data? There's some really beautiful ways of presenting data. I think my favourite's the top right one, which sort of shows, it's called Stats of the Union. So it shows data from across the states. So this one's talking about people without medical insurance in terms of low to high across populations, but there's lots and lots of these kind of data maps and things like that. More data maps. As more and more data is flowing around the web, people are, or rather, there are other uses. So something that a lot of retailers are really excited about at the moment is what's called social CRM. And social CRM is the ability to use social networks as a way of maintaining a relationship with your customer base. As a retailer, that's incredibly useful. And this takes lots of different forms. The most interesting form is a particular, sort of appears as a particular plugin for Google Mail. This is a snapshot of my Google Mail. What we're actually seeing here on the right is someone's basically personal data that's been pulled in from the web that matches their email address. So when I get an email, I can, on the right hand side, it shows me a picture of them, because that will have come from LinkedIn or Facebook or something like that. It shows me my last few tweets. Sometimes if I'm a friend with them on Facebook, it will show me their data from Facebook. It shows various other things. It's fantastic. It's brilliant. I can spy on people when they email me. If I don't know who they are, I can see what they're saying. It's all publicly available information, so there's nothing magical. It's the fact that it's been aggregated together and then presented to me in a really interesting form. That's a bit of fun, and that's quite useful for me as a tool, but if you're a large retailer, if you're Walmart, or if you sell online like Amazon, then that becomes really useful, because you know the Tesco Club Card model of store your data and what do you buy, combined with kind of social media data, it actually starts to become really, really scary. However, and as a filmmaker, this kind of data could be really useful. Imagine taking your mailing list for your film, and then you know, taking all of this data and then looking at who is buying my film. So I've had my film on sale, and I've got all these people who've bought my film or listed my, you know, wanted to be on my mailing list. And it would be great if you, well, you can do this. You could then work out, well, if it's 75% female, and like a third of them are based in North America, a third in Europe, a third on the rest of the world, 2/3 of them are on Facebook. The amount of data you can get is getting better every year. So you could look at home ownership, you could look at projected income, all sorts of things, and you're starting to have a much more interesting and, dare I say, intimate relationship with your audience that previously wasn't available. So I think this is a really interesting area as well.
I'm sorry, how did you get that into your Google Mail?
If you use Google Mail, it's just a plugin. It's called Rapportive. So it's up here. This is the plugin up here. Rapportive. It's a free plugin. Games and gamification. This is something that Ingrid talks about with the Plum, but I don't know that much about because I'm not really involved with it. Games and interactive games and gaming have just mushroomed, and I think, you know, the film broadcast has an awful lot to learn from games in many ways. Its popularity is really interesting because it has that interactive element, but it's still quite a cinematic experience sometimes. And I think games are presenting a lot of opportunities to tell stories in new and interesting ways. There's lots of people who can talk more comprehensively about games, but it's an area that's worth keeping an eye on.
DocFest are doing it now.
Yeah,
when you tweet, and if you tweet certain subjects, then they give you a virtual badge for that subject, and then you go through and you get the whole lot of badges. I don't know what you get. That's
you don't
the
get
thing,
anything.
you know, like
just
you
get
probably
badges.
don't get.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm going to come on to things like Foursquare and that kind of thing, the idea of geographically aware social networking. There are starting to emerge what we've called serious games, but the idea of applying the principle of having fun and something that's interactive to to subject matter that's a little more serious. Some really nice examples of kind of Sims style. So Sims is a family game where you can play various characters within the family. This kind of style thing has been applied to a few cases. So there's one about Darfur here and the kind of process of surviving in Darfur. It's presented in a very fun way, but reinforces kind of serious issues that are underlying within that problem. There are other ways of extending the storytelling experience, but games is one of them, but there are lots of opportunities to really kind of weave a story throughout other media, rather than thinking of the story as being a set, linear process that you have to start at the beginning and you watch for an hour and a half, but weaving the storytelling, the story throughout either real things, so you could start the story with, register for the story and start with a text message that you get. And there's an example here at DocFest. You can take a mobile phone and wander around, and it tells you a story and you have to do things, and at the end you have to rob a bank, and then it's... but there's some really nice examples of this, and also weaving it in with kind of role-playing games as well, and that idea of kind of bringing a story into the real world and something that you really interact with. The way that stories are told online, I think, has also changed, and one of the really exciting developments right now is based around HTML5. HTML5 is the 5th version of HTML. HTML is the language that underpins a lot of the web side of things. So when you go to a website, you are downloading code in the form of HTML. Beyond that, it all gets a little bit techie, but HTML5 has some new features built into it that mean you can do some really interesting things. One of which is the idea of loading. Is related to video and the idea of opening up video. So at the moment we have all this fantastic data online. We have the ability to interact with things. We can, do online banking or microblog or whatever. But video is very much still a locked format. If you go to YouTube, you press play and you watch it to the end. There's actually not much else you can do. HTML5 is about to change all of that and open up the video stream itself, for want of a better expression. Does that make sense? Yeah. So let's watch this little demo.
Popcorn.js is an HTML5 video framework that lets you bring the web into your videos. Let's try it. This video was shot in New Orleans. This one was shot in Cape Town. Here are some Flickr photos from the guy in this video. See how the content of the video can change the web page? This is Will Ferrell dancing to this exact song, and here's what people are saying about him on Twitter. He also has an article on Wikipedia. popcorn has been used to show analysis of a president's speech, to add value to a TV show, to mash up Donald Duck and Glenn Beck, and to understand the real Justin Bieber. We've even started working on a graphical user interface for popcorn called Butter. We have plugins for many web services already, and Popcorn is an open source project that is evolving constantly. Join us and let's make video and the web play nicely together.
So, it's a fairly simple example, but I think a really powerful idea that you can trigger events as you're watching. So, the obvious thing is kind of messages, so that as you're watching a film, you could put little comments. So you get to 1 minute, 15 seconds, and you say, well, I'm not sure about this bit, or, oh, that was really scary, or whatever, you know, is appropriate. And then when people replay the video, they get all the comments pop up at the same time. Might be annoying for most films, and some films it might seem. But
Some it might make better.
some it might be better because suddenly there's something more entertaining. But you could also pull up what people are saying about that particular moment on Twitter, or that particular character that's just come on screen on Twitter right now, live. So you could watch that over and over again, and every time you watch it, your experience will be different because it's live data that's being mixed in with the video. It's a simple idea, but one that is almost limitless, really, because you're mixing pre-recorded video with live data from anywhere in the web, and because it's open source and a set standard using HTML5, it means that the only real limit is your imagination, because the technology will allow you to pull data from just about anywhere. So you could think of, you could have, for instance, a news piece that has a pre-recorded piece of material about somewhere, and you could actually be pulling in live events related to the shots that you're seeing, and it will be different every time you watch it. And all sorts of things pop into mind. I think it's really interesting.
Who controls what pops up?
So the popcorn is a technology that then is applied on other people's websites. So when you would control what pops up when you build the website, if that makes sense. So you would decide where your data is coming from, at what points the data will pop up, and how it will be related, and whether you want live data from here, or does that make sense? So it's this is kind of a building block or a framework to then for you to then make those decisions yourself when you build a new website. So it's a kind of toolkit. So you make the decision within your own project about where that data comes from.
So this comes in while you're developing a website, as opposed to if you've got a YouTube channel already with your films on it, could you apply it to that, or do the two not mix?
I don't know if you could apply it to YouTube. I wouldn't have thought so. I don't think they would mix. This is very much, I mean, this is a developer's tool, so this is a techie tool for building your own stuff. And actually it's, I mean, this has been possible before, but it's really hard to do, as you can imagine. Even with this really nice toolkit, it's still actually quite hard to do. Another thing we're thinking about and bringing into the mix is how mobile phones have affected people's relationship with all sorts of different things, each other. From a story point of view, the idea of accessing a story or something through a mobile phone is very attractive when you think that in many sort of developing nations, the level of mobile phone saturation is well over 100%. Or, you know, everyone has a phone, if not two. And if the campaign or film that you're making suits this, it has that particular audience, you need to start thinking about, is Twitter, for instance, appropriate? Is it appropriate to have a website? Can people who I'm talking to actually access these things? Or is it better to do something by text message? Or is there another medium? Mobile will become the way that people access the web in the future. And there are all sorts of stats that change every day about how many people access from their smartphones, but it's definitely going to become a big player, if it hasn't already, in terms of how people interact with interactive things on the web. What a terrible sentence. So another thing to feature into the mix, don't think about people accessing stuff through laptops, but what else is there? User-generated content and kind of participation-based media is quite interesting. Life in a Day was a film made by YouTube that contributed lots and lots of clips and then was edited very nicely into a film. There's been a lot of this kind of thing around. I think it's really interesting. We've not seen the limit of where this will go. A great example of this, there's some great examples here. One Day on Earth was particularly good, but my favourite is Star Wars Uncut, which, if we just load, I'll play you the trailer.
Bear?
Basically what happened is they remade the entire trilogy of, well, they are remaking the entire trilogy of Star Wars films, the original ones, by everyone contributing 20 seconds in whatever style they want. So that's why the style changed 3 times. So the first one was a little bit of animation, the second one was a bit of animation, some live footage, the third one was kind of some graphics overlaid with live footage. It changed every 20 seconds. I think it's quite nice. I'm not sure how many times you could actually do that and it'd still be nice. So, location-based social networking. That is the idea of mixing social networks with where you are, your geographic location. So, if Facebook knew where you were at any particular given time and then it projected that to your friends, that would actually add a sort of new layer of interest, you know, if you knew where your friends were. There's several social networking sites.
Maybe you don't want your friends to know
No,
where
there
you are.
is Foursquare is a really good social networking site that allows you to check in certain places, and this is where the badges come in. So when you check into a certain location more times than anyone else, you become the mayor of that location. And you can do various things to earn badges within that location. What's happened now, and I've done this several times, is that when you check into a certain location, is that the location you're in, if it's some kind of retail store or a restaurant, sends you offers, because you've just checked in there, so it sends you some offers. So I went to a burger restaurant in Auckland and checked in, and I got a free burger, which was great. So it's worth looking up for. And there's all sorts of things you can do within the context of social networking and knowing a geographic location. It's an interesting device for using for storytelling. The idea that someone goes around all these different points and then you can relay different parts of the story to them depending on where they are physically located. Is really interesting. Everyone said, well, a lot of people said that this year was going to be the year of kind of location-based services, and we're definitely seeing a lot more of them. And I think, you know, a lot of people's first reaction is, I don't want everyone to know where I am, and there are all sorts of interesting security issues, but it's getting more and more popular. the web with the world of things, there are a lot of other ways of interacting between the real world and the web. A good example in the middle there is the QR code, so that kind of blocky block in the middle is a QR code which, if you use a scanner on your iPhone, will allow you to scan it like it's a barcode. So it kind of takes a photo. It takes a photo of the QR code, which doesn't work very well on screen, and then will actually take a record of the information held in there, and you can usually it's a URL to go to a website or something like that. QR codes are really, really popular in Korea and Japan. You see them on all advertising all the time. They're everywhere. They've been around for a while, and only recently, I think, probably in the last 6 months, I've started to see them outside of Japan and Korea and sort of Asia generally.
I've got one of my new BT Home Hub.
Oh, really?
There's loads of them in the newspapers at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's lots of other newspapers in Canada too.
Yeah, yeah. I think they've now. I'd be really interested to find out how many people actually use them, because I think they've just become the hot new thing to stick on your advert at the moment, which is why they're everywhere. Maybe they'll go when people go, actually, no one ever clicks on it, or maybe they'll stay. I don't know. We'll see. They are incredibly useful, however. Sticky Bits is a barcode that, again, you scan with an app on your phone. The idea is that you can attach a message to a barcode, and the barcode is a physical sticker that you can then stick on things. So the idea is that if you have the app, you could stick a barcode on any location, your front door for instance, and then when someone else sees that barcode, you can communicate that message to them. They take a photo of the barcode is read, and the message come in, the door is open, is relayed to them. So again, the idea of mixing an interactive element with a real world physical element, you could stick that on books, you could stick that on all sorts of interesting things, and yeah, so again, that has lots of interesting potential. Augmented reality is great. Right. That's Ingrid. So that's the normal image, and then it's projecting the gorilla on top of the black square, so that as you move the black square around, so it's a 3D model that's been mapped onto the black square.
Where's the sound coming from?
You what, sorry?
The sound. Where's the sound coming from?
That's part of the experience. Yeah. So the 3D model that's projected onto the square has a kind of a little story that you can build up, and it has different actions and things like that. There's loads of really good examples. GE did a campaign where they sent people a kind of piece of paper in the post and told them to go to this particular web address, and it had a special sign printed onto the piece of paper, so that when they went to the web address, it said, "Can I use your webcam?" They clicked yes, and then they were told to hold up the piece of paper to the webcam, and the webcam then sprouted a wind farm in front of you. So the wind farm all came up, and then the kind of paper folded out at the sides. This is augmented, so it was coming back on the screen. Folded out at the sides, and some trees sprouted, and then birds, and then right at the end, the sun popped up, all in front of you. You're all still sat there holding the paper. It was really, really good. Other examples of augmented reality are things like there's an iPhone app that allows you to see where the stars are. I don't know if you've seen this. Yeah, it's really good. I think I've got it on here. So it takes the data of it takes the data of where the phone is and allows you to see in real time. So the sun is currently over there, and then as I move around, I can see that there's a constellation in that direction. It doesn't work very well indoors.
What is it called, the app? Because I saw it to a friend and then
Star Walk, yeah.
Star Walk.
Star Walk. There are a few of them. Bing, which is the Microsoft search engine, they did a version that would actually allow you to see what was in a street. So you would hold up your mobile phone, and as you kind of moved around, it would tell you that behind that wall there was a restaurant, and if you went around the corner there was this shop, and you could do a search based on that, and then it would actually project that live search results, a bit like Google Maps, in 3D, and you could move your phone around and things like that. That was a demo done a little while ago, so in time, we'll start to see those kind of apps. So, that's the end of here's some cool stuff. Isn't it cool? Stuff to think about. This is the next section, the next half of the discussion, and this is really how does this relate to the world that everyone here exists in. So how does this relate to storytelling? How does this relate to documentary, film, broadcast, whatever particular area? How do you think about this in terms of building an audience, and how can you use these tools within some kind of storytelling medium? I think one of the things that people, when they tend to come to these new tools, is that there's a lot of apprehension, and people are a little bit worried about how complicated they are. And I think it's worth talking about how web developers actually work. They mess around with the web like a kid. So most web developers that I've worked with were self-taught. They never went to college. They just worked out how to do these things by trying it, breaking it, trying it, breaking it again, trying it, slightly working but not very well, then getting better, and so on and so on. And so most of these tools that are being built by open source networks, for instance, rather than corporations. They're usually being built by people who are really enthusiastic about a particular idea. So Popcorn, for instance, is open source. That means it's just a bunch of people who probably have never met each other and are just talking to each other through various social networks, particularly geeky social networks, not Facebook. And a couple of them have come up with a great idea, and people have decided to contribute code, and then something like Popcorn is then born. And it is all about messing around with things. So I think if there are any tools that you like the look of and you think, how would that work? The best way is just to roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty and break it. Code used to be something done by people with long, lank hair in dark rooms, and it still works that way a lot. But as it's becoming more and more mainstream, there have been a lot of artists who've started to take quite geeky forms and get to grips with code and produce all sorts of really amazing things. I think that really applies to film projects, and I think it's really difficult if you have a film project you want to have some kind of online element. If you don't really have a feel for how things work online, it can be really difficult, and it's worth just playing around and doing a little bit of reading. How does the web work? I'm not advocating learning to program at all, but these things go a long way.
Sorry, can I be beyond ignorant? What do you mean by code?
Code is the language that is used to perform commands. So a program that you run on your computer is basically just a long list of commands and code. and that's called code. So that's what programmers do all day. They write code, they sit there, and it's like writing in another language. It's almost incomprehensible, but it's just, you know, letters. And then the computer processes those letters and will start at the top and work its way down. It says, if this value is such, it will produce this, and then it's a kind of form of logic. And that's how everything that works on the computer works. So the programs that you use on your computer all run through code. The websites that you use all have various different types of code that make them up, back-end and front-end code. So when you do your online banking, the computer is processing your instructions and then feeding back information based on your instructions, and that's how you get your account balance, and then it's displayed. So that's code.
It's very, very difficult to work with a programmer. When, if say years back, other existence, you're a specialist in a certain field, and you want a program to support that and to be able to be used as a tool by people working in that format. Trying to get a programmer turns out it's like you're talking French and they're talking Swahili, because you don't understand their world, and they haven't got a clue about what it is you do that you want them to create this amazing program about, or database storage thing for. So unless you know some of their world and you get them enough interested in your
kind of find a meeting point.
Wow. Yeah, definitely, because you have to kind of couch things and explain things to kind of people who understand code in a completely different way that you would explain it to other people. If I was being really cruel, no, I'm not going to be really cruel, but often people become interested in programming and interested in code because they have a slightly certain mindset, one that appeals to kind of logic, one that appeals to kind of similar sort of thing to mathematics. You know, it's either right or it's wrong. There's no grey area. That's not actually true all the time, but the majority of people, kind of programmers, will think in that kind of way. They have to, otherwise you'd make terrible code. You're like, oh, if it's kind of like this, do that. It doesn't work with a computer.
They hate documentary makers.
Exactly, exactly. So a documentary maker talking to a programmer it's like French and Swahili. There's just no comprehension either way.
You do want the shades of grey when you're asking for it, and it can't be that.
Yeah. So there is a process of kind of translating needed between the two parties, and I think actually a lot of projects, documentary, sort of interactive documentary projects, fail horribly not because everyone wasn't committed or, you know, for other reasons, because the two halves just can't communicate with each other naturally, and so it has to be kind of translated, which is a whole skill in itself. But if you immerse yourself into that world slightly, it will give you some empathy, and when you're talking to a programmer, you can start to, rather than talking about things in a kind of in terms of feelings or in terms of results or in terms of shades of grey, you can start to talk in terms of logic and kind of steps and that kind of process.
And are there any resources you'd kind of encourage us to go to? Because I'm assuming if I googled how to learn code, I'd get
you'll get a ton of stuff. That's a good question. I've never been asked that. I don't know. I would Google something like a great introduction to the web, or a great introduction to HTML, and there might be some nice friendly introductory articles that will talk about it in real world terms rather than code terms. So that said, once you start to think about the amount of tools that are out there, it becomes a really complicated process, because you've now, let's say, you've decided that you've been told that your particular film project needs some kind of interactive element, or you want to look at new forms of distribution and that involves some kind of interactive element. Where do you go from there? This wheel shows just how many different types of tools are out there, and it's designed to be small because, frankly, the choice is overwhelming. So, when you start to think about a project that is approaching some kind of online element in terms of distribution or promotion, I have a film project and I want 2,000 people on Facebook and I want a mailing list of 8,000 people, because I know that then I can start to sell my film. Great. How do you start doing that? The way to think about it is like an octopus. So an octopus has a head and then it has 8 tentacles. And then on each tentacle it has multiple suckers. And it's very effective at reaching out and grabbing different objects from different directions because it has 8 tentacles. Your strategy for this particular type of project could be thought of in the same way. And at the head, you kind of have things that you own on the web. And by that I mean things like a blog. Does everyone know what a blog is, I presume? When I first did this presentation about 3 years ago, my first question was, what is Facebook? So I've learned to ask every time, just to check. Your blog, your website, various resources within the website, videos and so on, these, and your mailing list. These are things that you own and you design and so on and build. And then the tentacles that come out from that are other ways of them bringing an audience into the head, which is the website. Things like Facebook and social networking, things like microblogging like Twitter, social bookmarking like Digit, other people's blogs. So if you have a documentary and it's about a particular subject that probably other people are interested in, the chances are that a quick Google search will result in several blogs about the same subject. And these blogs already have people who are interested in the subject reading them. Sometimes it may be 3 people, but sometimes it might be 100,000 or 1 million. Once you have these assets for your film in the middle, you can then start reaching out to these people who already have your audience and are already talking to your potential audience based on that particular subject. It's called guest blogging, when you then offer to write a blog on someone else's blog about your project, for instance, or why the subject that they talk about interests you and why you're making a film about it. And you know, it's kind of that reciprocal arrangement can work really well. The same can be done with other sites that aren't blogs, so there may be sites that cover similar kind of subjects. There may be organisations working in a similar kind of area. There may be NGOs who have mailing lists. These people are called key influencers, and they are people who will put you in touch with large volumes of people outside and beyond your reach normally. And it's worth thinking very carefully about that, because if you have a couple of key influencers, it's like going to the Good Pitch and being hooked up with an NGO who has a mailing list of 2 million people. You can do the same thing online by searching through by subject and various other things. Again, that's another tentacle that you can use to bring your audience into your assets in the middle. You can use video channels like Vimeo, YouTube to again tap into those communities and attract people who are all interested in the same subject by posting little videos about the particular subject in your film, and then using those communities and pulling them back to the assets that you own, like your mailing list, for instance. Is this making sense?
Yes.
Great. Lastly, no, not lastly, I've got one more. So penultimately, email bulletins. As you pull people back and they decide that the film is something that they're interested in, you want to start pushing people towards your mailing list, because at the end of the day, it's great if your Vimeo clip or trailer has 4 million views, but what will be most useful to you is a list of email addresses that you can then send out a mailing list to. And your mailing list, I'm sure everyone's got them all the time from films, is like, I've got a film on here, or my DVD's now out for sale. Although it's been around for a while and everybody gets the emails, it's still a very effective way of highlighting and showing what's going on and staying in touch with people. So having a mailing list and getting people's emails is really, really important. Widgets is, so a widget is a little piece of code that can be copied and taken and put on other people's sites. So it's almost like a little window into something you've created, a little window into your own website that can be put on any other website. And it's like a little window, a little channel that comes back to you. What's great about widgets, well, a great example of a widget is YouTube videos. So you can go to YouTube and you can see the videos on YouTube, but if you go to someone's blog, they might have embedded a YouTube video there. Well, the video is still coming from YouTube, but it's on someone else's website. If you make yourself a widget, you can do something similar so that someone who is interested in a similar subject can take your widget about your film and put it on their website. And it acts as a little advert for your film. They're really, really effective. So we did...
And how do you do them?
There's various free resources that allow you to make them yourself. Probably my favourite is called Widget Box. And
Widget Box?
Widget Box, yeah, B-O-X. Widget Box allows you to make various widgets that pull in various pieces of content, video and things like that, and then you can then put them on your own website for people to put on their websites. It's not too complicated, it's pretty easy to do, it's pretty quick, and it works quite nicely, they're quite slick. We did a film a few years ago called Vanishing of the Bees, and for the UK release we produced a widget. And it wasn't a particularly complicated widget, it had the trailer on there, had a few bits of information, I think it had a blog and a Twitter feed and various, nothing particularly complicated. There was a guy who ran a beekeeping blog, and he must have found the widget somehow. He put the widget on his blog, and we had 40,000 people visit our website from that widget. So, if it works, widgets can be really, really effective.
How were you able to monitor that it came from the widget?
Because of the stats, so the statistics that are monitored and maintained and recorded by website visitors tracks all of this information.
Oh,
so
okay.
we can track all of this.
So you
say
can see
so
that
many
they came through that widget.
Exactly.
That's how they arrived for you. Okay.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And also, plus we can see how many people looked at the widget, how many people interacted with the widget. We can see all sorts of things, where they are, what type of computer they've got, what browser they've got,
Really?
shoe size. We worked on, we did bits and pieces for a Raising David film that showed the year before last about privacy. And in the film they track David Bond using his mobile phone and web technology, and that's all really eminently possible. This is a more complicated version of the previous slide, but what's great about this is kind of some of the examples of those different tentacle-like sites. So Vimeo is great, but there are many others outside of the obvious ones like Facebook, Twitter. But there's also Dig, Stumble Upon, Delicious, Blogger is a really good network of blogging sites. Flickr has a great community on it. A lot of people seem to engage much more with photographs and with each other, so Flickr is another community to think about. Vimeo is a great creative community and is definitely worth thinking about. And there are others like professional networks like LinkedIn, Dailymotion, Technorati and so on, and there are many, many other yet more examples. Social bookmarking, I think, is something that people don't talk about much because it's quite dull. But actually, as a community and in terms of traffic, are actually very, very valuable to people who want to filmmakers who want to grow their audience. How am I doing for time?
It's 25 after 5.
Cool. I think, does everyone know what the bookmarking websites are, like Dig and Stumble Upon? So the idea behind all of them is that, when you type in your URL and you can bookmark it on your browser. The idea of that is that it's a website that allows you to hold your bookmarks. And then the interesting part comes when you then share those bookmarks with other people. And that's the basis of Stumble Upon. Stumble Upon is a kind of recommendation engine for bookmarks. 20 other people like this, so you might like this. It's a really good way of being discovered. And at the beginning I showed you some kind of stats from a particular website. I can't remember exactly, but I think 1.5–2% of people were coming from StumbleUpon. So there are people who will probably have never come across the film, but because somebody's recommending the link to them, they are stumbling across it and coming through. So again, boring and dull, but worth thinking about as other sources of finding an audience.
So sorry, with StumbleUpon, you can create your own profile and then you try and get featured on it, or is it?
You can do that. It's a bit like Google in that it can automatically pick things up. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely worth putting things on. StumbleUpon, I think, is less of a community than things like Flickr. So it's something worth bearing in mind rather than something you'd want to engage with, perhaps you would with Flickr or YouTube or Twitter and so on. So, thinking about your digital strategy, kind of the project stretches out in front of you in terms of time, 3, 4, 5 years worth of work. When you think about your audience and how they then start to interact with the things that you're building, like your website, your mailing lists, maybe other creative things that you're making, so some nice little video editing thing, or some live data that's coming in, or a wiki article about the subject on your film, all sorts of things that you could do. There's a bit of basic theory that applies very well to thinking and planning how the audience is going to interact with these elements, and it's the 1990 or the 99-1 theory, which applies in real life, but it applies very well to kind of groups online. And a great example of this is Wikipedia. So Wikipedia is an online encyclopedia where people edit the articles themselves and write them themselves. However, how many people here have ever written a Wikipedia article? How many people here have done a web search and ended up on Wikipedia and have found something out about it? A fair number of people.
Might have added a comment to an article.
So the idea of 1990 is that the vast majority of people, when they interact with these kind of things, they simply do it on a consumption basis. You go to Wikipedia because you want to find something out, because you don't know something, and then you find it out and you go away. However, if that's what everybody did, Wikipedia would not exist because nobody would have written the articles in the first place. So then you have kind of a much smaller group of people who work with Wikipedia, and they're the ones who kind of look at articles and they finish articles that other people have started, and they edit them because there's a few typos or kind of dip in and out. Not too much of a commitment, but definitely more than the rest of us. And then there's a very, very small part, the 1%. And they are probably the most important people to Wikipedia because they're the people who sit down and write for hours these articles. And then within that 1%, there was 1% who do nothing but write articles for Wikipedia because they have nothing else to do for some reason, and are incredibly committed. And then within that, there is probably an individual who has written hundreds of thousands of articles for Wikipedia and is their top ranked Wikipedia writing person. So it's kind of a sliding scale, with most of us being down here not really having much to do with it. And that's the theory. So these are kind of your broad bases, 1, 9, 90. When you're thinking about the strategy for your project, instead of just assuming that everybody's going to come to the site and do the same thing, everyone comes to the site and share it with their friends, or everyone comes to the site and watch the trailer and then they'll go off and they'll add to the Wikipedia article, that would be great. They won't at all. The vast majority of people will do nothing whatsoever. They are your 90%. They might join the mailing list, but generally they won't do anything you ask them to do. They definitely won't do any of the things that you ask them to do because they're coming back to find more information about the causes in the film, or how to take action, that kind of thing. 9% of people will probably do really easy asks, and then 1% of people are going to be incredibly committed to the subject matter that you're talking about in your project. And they're the 1% of people that you would need to think really carefully about. What am I asking them to do? How are they going to get involved in this? they're committed to the subject matter. So how can I engage with them? And if you're working within a fairly small niche, and your audience is in the hundreds of thousands rather than the millions, the chances are that 1% will be a small handful of people that you can probably interact with on a personal basis. So as part of your strategy, you need to think about those 3 distinct groups and what you're asking them to do, and what the kind of bargain, what the deal is. Because the vast majority of people are really too lazy, too disinterested most of the time to actually engage with what they're doing. And this, I think, relates to the idea a lot of people have, is that if you build it, people will come. And it's not true at all. Creating your own networks. It is possible to create your own social networks. And that's a great way of engaging with people. There's a project that was done a little while ago called Resist by Mark Silver. And what they did was they set up a Ning network. A Ning network allows you to kind of roll your own Facebook, so people have all these connections. And then they crowdsourced ideas for documentaries from people talking about their experiences of resisting in whatever form around the world. And there's lots of other examples of that kind of thing. Social media, so the Facebook, Bebo, MySpace, Twitter, these sites combined with your website are a great way to find your key influencers and also find that 1% of the audience that are really going to help you kickstart your project. Blogs are also a great way of doing it. So, you've thought about what you want your 1% to do. You've thought about kind of your assets, you've got a website going. How do you then start to get this project from you, your family, and the dog? And how do you project that so that it's hundreds, thousands, millions of people interacting with it? The temptation is to get up on a soapbox and use a megaphone and go, "This is fantastic, come and see it, come and see it." But that doesn't apply very well on the web, because social interactions on the web apply the same rules that social interactions in real life do. So if you went to a party or a networking event and you wanted to tell everyone about this great thing, the last thing you do is get up in the middle of the room with a megaphone and tell everyone. What you do is go around and ask people, "What do you do?" and "This is what I do," and common sense, courtesy kind of thing. And exactly the same applies to the web. So this idea of engaging with people rather than telling people about your project, so swapping things with people and finding people who share same subjects and interested in the same subject, and then engaging with those people and treating them as friends, rather than just blasting everyone with emails saying, "Come to my cinema event, come to my cinema event, buy my DVD, buy my DVD, buy my DVD now." And that also relates to the second thought of sharing rather than selling, and the idea that you can give information away and give of yourself by commenting on things, commenting on other people's blogs, sharing all of the kind of things that you're doing with other people, rather than just going, "Buy my DVD, buy my DVD," because no one will buy your DVD. And the way that these interactions work on the web means that a lot of this kind of engaging and sharing is almost always reciprocated, and so it does result eventually in you being able to tell people and being able to sell whatever it is you want to sell at the end of the day. Part of the this is cute. So this was a Lucy Cook's Amphibian Avengers video. Lucy talked, was it the day before yesterday about this? Oh, it was at the crossover on Wednesday. Yes, it was. She's done really well, and I don't know what the current figures are, but it's in the millions. Her video has gone viral, and loads of people watch it. For some reason, people love watching videos of sloths, and particularly ones that are orphans and live in an orphanage in South America. Partly because people like videos of sloths, and Lucy's videos are really nicely made, cute kind of things. The video has reached that many people because they've shared it with each other. There was no way that Lucy could have emailed that many people and gone and watch my video. But the process of each person sharing it with 2 people means that eventually 5 million people will watch it. However, if you make content and then there is no way for people to share it, it will never go viral. So add things that will allow people to share content really easily. No, it's not on there. Add this is a really good service. Share this, sometimes called add this. Yeah, that's all over the place. The process of getting people from that very first kind of vague awareness that your project exists, someone sent them a video that says, oh, this is kind of good, you're interested in this, why don't you watch this? The process of going from that point through to being a committed, loyal fan, having owned the DVD, the t-shirt, the mug, the deluxe DVD when it came out, attended every event ever, driving right across the country, etc., etc., is a kind of funnel. And I mean, this particular funnel is talking about advocacy, but it's the same whether you're buying a product, whether this is a fairly recognizable funnel. I think that the funnel has about 3 parts online. Kind of the vaguely awareness part, then there's the middle part where people are reminded, and usually it takes kind of 3 reminders for people to sort of vaguely get a consciousness of the project, and then the step after that is where you ask them to do something. If you do it in the wrong order, there's a vague awareness, they might have seen this video but they can't quite remember, and then you say, write to your MP straight away, it's not going to happen. So by following the steps of awareness and then reminders and then the ask, you can get people to do a lot more than if you don't follow the steps.
So how many reminders?
I think 3 points of contact is really good. There's lots and lots of blogs and people who are much more expert on this kind of thing with lots of figures to back them up, written about online. If you do a Google search on these kind of processes, you'll come up with tons of information, and it's all fascinating if you want to know more about that. Yeah. It's a really big and complicated subject, but I think first stage 3 reminders and then the ask is a really good rule of thumb personally. Okay, so change the subject completely. The big problem with taking all of this on as a filmmaker is that it's blooming time consuming, unbelievably so. So the key to it seems to be that you try everything, sign up for everything, and throw things away that don't work really quickly, rather than banging your head against the wall. So if you've set up a Facebook page and you're asking everyone to join, but it's just not working, then maybe Facebook is not the thing for your project, or maybe Twitter isn't the thing for your project. So it doesn't mean that you have to use everything all the time. However, at the beginning, it's really hard to work out which one will be a success because there's so many factors you have to take into account. So try everything, throw away the things that don't work, and make life easy for yourself. Probably skip over the Creative Commons and things like that. And there's some really interesting ways of showing films. Good screenings is one, indie screenings. Film Sprout in the US, working films in the US. So the idea that you can take your film and you can sell a license for someone else to screen it in a community situation, so community screenings in a village hall, in a church, or a corporate, for instance, if somebody wants to show a particular campaign video. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of sessions on this already. Okay, this is interesting. What tools are available to actually do all of these things? So I'm just going to go through a small list of some of the tools that are available. There are many, many others, and they're all on the wiki. A great one is called Flavors, flavors.me. Flavors allows you to create a website for yourself, a kind of profile for yourself or for a project based on other social feed elements, and it's really easy and quick to set up. So it's a great way to start a project off.
Is it spelled the European way or the? It's
spelled the American way with no U. It's an American website. Yeah, very good question. I forgot to say. I like it because the websites that are produced are really, really beautiful, and you can add big background images and things like that. You can add.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can add social media feeds. You can add images and things like that. When you're first getting a project off the ground, it's a great way to just get a kind of toe in the water and a place that you can start to own. And it's free. Movie Sparks is a tool that I've developed that allows you to do lots of these different things. I won't go into that because it's me. Egg Up is another form of, there should be an image there, another form of distribution tools. So it allows you to take a film and put it inside an app, and then you can download that. There are lots of really good tools appearing at the moment, like Distrify Player, Dynamo Player that we're here. Egg Up are doing some interesting things. There's a couple of other people doing app-like things, a few people doing widget things. People, I think, in the last 6 months to a year have started to build technologies that allow you to distribute your film online yourself properly rather than having to go through an aggregator or completely build something from scratch. That's the Dynamo Player.
Just out of interest, you know, with Egg Up, how does that differ from just having a conventional YouTube channel or Vimeo?
Oh, it allows you to monetize it, first of all. So this is something you can sell.
Oh, right, getting it right.
So all of these are things that you can sell. So
each one is like a pay for a download.
Absolutely, yeah. So traditionally, the problem with selling online is one of two things. First of all, if you release something, people will rip it and put it up on pirate sites for everyone else to download, which also happens if you release it on DVD. The other problem is what mechanism do you then use to actually distribute this to other people? So you can go through, and this is going to get a bit technical, but you can go through things like iTunes, but you can't just put it on YouTube and people watch it because you can't really make any money. You can make a bit of money from advertising, but actually no one really does, apart from a few people. And this has been a real problem, which is why we're starting to see these kind of, like the Egg Up is the idea that you embed the video into an application, a program that you then download and then unlock. So the program can't be cracked, so you can't get the video out, so you can't copy it, everyone has to buy their own copy. Which is kind of similar to what iTunes do, but no one else can use their technology. So if you can't get in the iTunes platform, you can't distribute your film in that way. Then there's the kind of streaming video, and there's lots of examples of lots of technology that basically will have a kind of 2 layers. The top layer being a payment mechanism of some kind. So I pay £1, £2, £3, whatever, via PayPal, and then that allows me to log in and then watch the film in a kind of YouTube style. So kind of YouTube with a lock on the front, and there's lots of those. That's the Dynamo player and the Distrify player kind of use that process. And I think we'll see lots of other ways of doing it. So, last couple of slides, I want to talk about just how much time is involved in doing all of these things, because it's such a phenomenal commitment. If you're on Twitter, it doesn't really work very well if you tweet once a month, because people will just miss it. If you tweet any more than once a month, it becomes an absolute pain in the bum. So, and the other thing is that having a Twitter feed that you started updating and then stopped halfway through, and didn't close down, just kind of left and then tweeted a month later, and then when 2 months later, really sorry I haven't tweeted. That doesn't work either. So there is a definite commitment up front, and you have to, I think, probably weigh the time factor much more than the money factor involved. Most of these tools are free, and the tools that aren't free are relatively cheap within the overall budget for a film. The time, however, is very time consuming. What's happening now is that more and more people are building into their production team people who do these kind of things. So people, John Reese coined the term producer of marketing and distribution, so that there is yet another kind of producer element, and they are tasked with finding an audience and selling the film to that audience. You don't have to go down that route, but some kind of new media style online person to do that kind of thing, whether that be in an editorial context, whether that be in a kind of programming context, or something in between, although the two don't mix very well. Adding at least one person on your team will make your life way more easy than trying to do it yourself, which will become a complete nightmare. There are other tools that you can use that will allow you to kind of lessen the load of the kind of social media burden. So for instance, there's tools like Posturous and various other ones, and they change all the time, and what they do is they allow you to write something once, and then it posts in lots of different places. And then it tells your Twitter feed that you've just posted to your blog, and then pushes that to your Facebook account, and rather than logging in one after the other and just writing it again. And then the other question that I get asked an awful lot is when should this all start? I mean, when should I start thinking about this? I've got a 40 cinema release next week. Should I do it now or leave it till the day before? The answer always is that you can never be too early. The longer you have kind of things in place, websites around, just picking up general interest, the bigger your end mailing list will be. So the answer is start as soon as possible. As soon as you know what the project is, put things up. It kind of doesn't matter if the name changes. I've had projects where the name has changed 3 times during the process of building the tools and using the tools. It kind of doesn't matter really. You know, you just have to update the website, change the name of the Facebook page, but it's okay. Yeah, everyone doesn't mind. Involve partners as soon as possible. So if you are going to have a new media or an online element within your production team, which you really, really should do, involve them as soon as possible. Treat it like part of pre-production and the production process. Don't leave it until after you finish your film, because it is definitely too late at that point. It'll also mean that they're really compromised, because they'll come to the project going, well, you should do this, and oh, you've done it all, and that's locked off, and can we put the URL at the end? Oh, it's already gone out. Oh, sorry, okay. So involve them right at the beginning of the process. Yeah, my top tips. Try everything, dump the stuff that doesn't work, always make it easy. And then this is the Digital Bootcamp wiki. It's at digitalbootcamp.wikispaces.com, and in there are all the resources I've talked about and a load more, and it's being added to all the time. Also on there is Ingrid's Twitter feed, which is twitter.com/fromthehip. Her Twitter feed is brilliant. I follow it. I learn things from it. It's great. She's great at just kind of spotting interesting things from a technical point of view that will apply to filmmakers. So I definitely use that. And then that's my email address. If you want to email me with a question, feel free. I happily get emails with questions. And that is it. Thank you very much. And does anyone have any questions? Anything that I've not covered? Or yes?
I'm curious about email programs because you collect all these email addresses, and then what do you do with them? You've got like a contact list, or you've got a spreadsheet, and then like I need to do this kind of immediately for a film that's about to get released, and what I'm worried about is like the places that I've called or like researched, it seems that everything is proprietary, and I guess like I don't want to have to go through their process to sort their like situation, or to sort through their like proprietary list functioning, and then have the company go down or whatever it is, and then wasted like the hours that I spent there to do it. I'd love to. I'm curious to know if there are ways to do it that you pay into, but you kind of still own your own.
That's a really interesting question. Yeah, and I presume by proprietary ones you're referring to things like Campaign Monitor and MailChimp and those kind of services.
Right.
I think there's two parts to that. The first part is that running your own mailing list and sending to that mailing list and capturing that data in the database is actually a relatively complicated thing to do if you just built it yourself. You would need to involve a programmer to do it properly. The reason why MailChimp and these other programs other services are so useful is because you don't have to do all of those things, and you can also get your data out of them at any point. So you can just go into your account, download your entire list of email addresses as a CSV file and store it on your computer. So as long as you did that regularly, if suddenly for some reason MailChimp went bust tomorrow, your data is not lost, although the process is lost. But because the process is so ridiculously easy compared to building it yourself, I think that's a fairly fair trade-off. I use MailChimp and Campaign Monitor for almost all the films that we work on. And although it's proprietary, they're still around. And I've used Campaign Monitor for 3-4 years now, and they're still here. They haven't gone bust yet. The ability to download that information means that that your data is safe. So I would say it's really complicated to go with any other route. So take the risk, because I think it would be slight. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess why one over the other? There was another one that people keep on telling me to do is Constant Contact.
Yeah, Constant Contact is slightly different again, but they're all much of a muchness. Why one over the other? It depends on the nitty gritty. MailChimp will allow you to send free newsletters up to 2,000 people. So if your list is 2,000 people or less, you can send free emails. So it's a completely free service. I think for a lot of films, film projects when they're starting out, it's very likely that for a little while they can have less than 2,000 people. So MailChimp makes a lot of sense because you don't have to pay for it. Constant Contact has some other advantages. They all basically do the same thing, so I would work out what the deal for you personally, which deal is best. I think MailChimp at the moment is the best deal.
Which one?
MailChimp, it's called. It's also the only one that has really good jokes and things like that.
Do they let you blend, like, I don't know, your database? In other words, like, I guess, you have like the American contacts, and then you have the Northeast contacts.
Oh
and
yeah,
then you have
yeah,
the Oregon
absolutely.
contacts.
So all of them allow you to segregate down lists and capture extra data. So I mean, I would always recommend people don't just capture name and email address. Capture name, email address, and a location of some kind. Be that postal code in the UK, or city if it's worldwide, or state if it's in the US, and city, or whatever the choices are that are appropriate. But as soon as you have location, name, and email, you can segregate the database so that when you're sending out an email saying that I've got a screening in Seattle, you don't send it to everyone in I don't know, Slough. You send it to everyone who lives near Seattle, and it's a bit more appropriate. You can take lots of extra information. You can start taking age and all sorts of other information, but that makes people less likely to fill it in the first place. So there's a trade-off between how much you ask and how likely people are to actually sign up.
What was the last one you said?
In terms of the websites?
Yeah, in terms.
MailChimp.
Oh, MailChimp. That's
MailChimp. Yeah, MailChimp. There's Constant Contact. I'd say is not as popular. It's a bit more corporate. MailChimp is really nice. They've got some really nice social features in there. So what I was talking about with Reportive, where you can kind of spy on people, they've built that into the system so that not at a very detailed level, so you can't spy individually, but they just kind of take some of that data and give you some really nice graphs about how many people are on Facebook or where they're from or things like that, and that's really useful information when you're talking to a traditional distributor. So like if you, in one glance, you can look at the world map and you can actually say, you know what, there is absolutely no point distributing this in insert name of country here because I can see that there is no one on the mailing list. However, Estonia for some reason is really showing up big. I wonder why. Maybe this film appeals to people in Estonia. Stuff like that is really useful. So, but you don't know that if you don't take location or sign up with Belgium.
Thank you. I've got to go now, but
Cool.
thank you. That was so helpful.
Thank
honestly.
you.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Anyone else got any other questions or anything else? Cool. Okay.
All right, so
Thank you very much.
Sorry, thanks again. Just wait to break.